Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this month's Black History Series presentation, Bright Lights, Black Stars, Negro League Players in Canada's Oldest Baseball League, with author Paul Allen. Paul Allen, BA, BPE, M.Ed, is a retired Ontario secondary school teacher who taught physical education, health, history, business, and Canadian law courses at the high school level for 32 years. He is a graduate of Assumption University, McMaster, and Wayne State. He also served as an assistant principal at a private school in Boca Raton, Florida, worked as a consultant for the United States Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education for a year, and completed his teaching career in Kingston, Ontario area. He is a two-time inter-county baseball league all-star who averaged over .300 in 5 seasons of his 9-year career. In his best year, he hit .371, good for third place in the batting race. He played on 5 pennant-winning teams for the London Majors and was a member of the 1969 IBL championship team. Paul also coached an Ontario men's basketball team to an Ontario provincial championship and has written 2 books, When Tobacco Was King and his new book, Bright Lights, Black Stars. Paul has spoken in various or in person in numerous Southwestern Ontario and U.S. cities about his tobacco and baseball books. He did a Bright Lights Black Stars book launch in his hometown Chatham, presented at an overflowed crowd for a London Sports Association meeting, traveled to Pittsburgh as a presenter for the Society of American Baseball Research, and was even a featured speaker at the Canadian Baseball History Conference held in Toronto. Paul also has done several virtual presentations to share the Bright Lights Black Stars story with various organizations. So before we begin, I just want to remind everyone in the audience that this is going to be recorded. So if you're not comfortable being on camera, to keep your camera off. Also, before we begin, just ask while Paul is presenting, if you could please mute your microphone so that it's not distracting. Following the presentation, there'll be a Q&A period. So just type your questions in the comment section, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. And at that point, you're more than welcome to turn your mic back on. And one final note, if you would like to support programming such as our Black History Series, you can donate by going to our website, amherstburgfreedom.org. So now I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so that we can see your slides. Just let me know when you see it, okay?
Well, hello, everybody. I guess it's good afternoon and happy belated July the 1st. And of course, to our American friends, happy July the 4th. You see on the screen a picture of the cover of my book, Bright Lights, Black Stars. I'm going to deal with the Negro League players in Canada's oldest baseball league, the Inter-County Baseball League. And the whole story I consider to be a great integrated baseball success story. Next slide. So what we're going to do is, well, I have a plan that I'm going to show you in a minute, but I just want to let you know that 61 years ago, I started playing baseball in the Inter-County, and now, the little red-headed guy, that's not me. Mine is more gray. I've written a book about that experience playing 9 years in the Inter-County, and I just had to show you a picture of my daughter in Denver, Colorado. She ordered 2 books, and she's so excited for her dad. Next. There's a great connection with the Inter-County, myself, and Windsor that I want to share with you. My first coaches as a youngster in Chatham, Ontario, were Jack Fairs to your left. The next person, Joe Béchard, Willie Casanova, and Bruno Casanova. The Casanova brothers, of course, are Windsor products. Joe Béchard was from Michigan State, and Jack Fairs was the just honored physical education teacher and coach at the University of Western Ontario, kind of the dean of coaches, a tremendous fundamentalist. So we Chatham boys were coached by 4 men who played in the Inter-County, 2 of whom, Willie and Bruno, who played pro baseball, Willie with the New York Yankees and Bruno with the St. Louis Cardinals. Next slide. I was fortunate to have played in Chatham with some really great players. And I just picked a few. to the left, the guy with the big ears, is yours truly, and the guy next to me is the great Fergie Jenkins. We were probably about 15 years old at that time, and I played with Fergie for a lot of years, and I've known him, I guess now close to 70 years. And I'm also fortunate enough to play with Mel Wakabayashi. You see him with his Junior Maroons hockey shirt on. Mel, I wrote a little bit about him in the book. Is quite a story. Born in a concentration camp, not a concentration camp, a camp where the Japanese who lived in Canada were put in these camps. Internment camps would be the proper term. Uh, because at the time, I guess the Canadian government was afraid the Japanese were to attack Canada. But he came from an internment camp to become a successful athlete, coach of the Japanese Olympic team, and just a fine gentleman. The other player that I played with, who's actually all of those guys except me are in the Chatham Hall of Fame, was Larry Babcock, who played at Michigan, was a successful lawyer in Chatham and a tremendous athlete. And then, of course, the young fellow on the right there in 1962, Fergie Jenkins, who played with the Philadelphia Phillies next. So I was fortunate to have played with these guys, and I'm going to go through this real quickly, but I'll connect with these guys later. The Windsor connection, Tommy White, Hank Biasetti, and the great Freddie Thomas. Next page. The next slide also recognizes that Freddie has finally become a member of Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. And I know that most of the people in Windsor know a lot about Freddie Thomas. And I often tell people when I do my presentations that Freddie Thomas is probably the greatest, most superior all-around athlete in Canadian history that very few people, except perhaps in Windsor and Essex County, know anything about. So Freddie was a star in the Intercounty Baseball League also. Next. Here are the pictures of three of the great players who came out of Windsor that played in the Intercounty. Willie Casanova is a member of the Windsor and Essex Sports Hall of Fame. He played in the Yankee organization. His team from Windsor, I think it was Patterson, won an OBA high school basketball championship. He was a great player for the University of Western Ontario Mustangs when they won a national championship. And he was just a tremendous man, a great teacher of baseball, and a great player himself. Bruno, who followed Willie as our Chatham coach, signed with the St. Louis Cardinal organization and played in what they call the Pony League, Pittsburgh, Ontario, and New York. And he played for Hamilton. And he was our coach for years. And as probably some of you know, he then moved to Amherstburg, where he was the recreation director. And I understand that there's a Bruno Casanova Way or road named after him. Another Windsorite who was a terrific ball player in the Intercounty is Russ Evon. Russ started out in Windsor, moved to London, was a two-time batting champion, and was also runner-up two times, only by a few points. Next slide. So here's my plan. I'm going to give you a brief baseball history of baseball in Canada. I'm going to point out a few Canadians who are connected to Major League Baseball. I'm going to tell you about the Intercounty Baseball League, and I'm going to specialize, which my book does, on the glory years, the teams and the players, and some stories about the Intercounty. And then I'm going to wrap up with some taters, some home runs that I heard about or actually saw. Next slide. Well, let's start with baseball. This is a controversial thing. Who invented baseball? Well, we Canadians claim that we perhaps invented baseball. And I wrote the expression, is this a boring truth or an exciting lie? Is it Canada or is it the United States? Well, there's a terrific book by Brian Chip Martin that academically investigates the creation myth. Was it Adam Ford? Was it Abner Graves? Was it Cooperstown where the first game was played? No, it wasn't. Next slide. The thing that people kind of miss, at least in the United States, is the history of Canada and baseball. I sent my book to a man who does a podcast and has a great following in Chicago. And he sent me this basically. And he said, I didn't know this. I didn't know the first recorded baseball game was played in Canada. I didn't know that Babe Ruth hit possibly his first professional home run in Canada. He said, I didn't know that. I knew Babe's first baseball coach was Brother Matthias, but I didn't know he was a Canadian. Well, he was. He was from Nova Scotia. He didn't know that many, many Negro League players and Major League players played baseball in Canada. He also was quite surprised that Canada is home to the oldest continuously operating league in the world. And little did he know that Labatt Memorial Park, which is the home of the London Majors, is the longest continuously played diamond in the world. And this is all verified. And I'll mention that and show you that in a minute. He didn't know that Jack Graney was the first pro player to face Babe Ruth. And little did he know that Graney was the first player to do play-by-play for the Cleveland Indians. Frank Selkirk was a Canadian, and he's the man that replaced Babe Ruth in center field and actually wore number 3 before the Yankees retired Babe Ruth's number. Tip O'Neill is a Canadian. He has the second highest batting average in Major League Baseball. So those are the things that I uncovered as I did the book and shared that with a lot of people. Next slide. So the very first games in baseball were probably played in Canada. There's evidence that in 1793, a game of baseball was played in New Brunswick. Later in 1819, a game was played in Hamilton. Now, the rules might not have been the same as more modern rules and ways of playing. But in 1838, it is now officially accepted by Major League Baseball, the Guinness World Records, that Beachville, which is not too far from Stratford and St. Mary's area, played the first recorded baseball game in 1838. The first recorded baseball game in the U.S., evidently, was 1845 in New York, and they also played a game around the same time in Massachusetts, and they had what's called the Knickerbocker rules, which are a little bit more modern than what the Beachville crowd played. Next. One of the leagues that started up in 1877 was the International Association team. And there were 7 teams in that league. And London had one and Guelph had one. When I spoke in Pittsburgh, it was really fun to tease the people who are so proud of the, I think it was called the Pittsburgh Alleghenies in 1877, that London actually beat Pittsburgh 5-2 in the championship game. Next. Now, let's talk a little bit about Bud Fowler. Bud Fowler played in that International Association League for the Lynn Live Oaks, and he was the first black player, evidently, in professional baseball. He actually pitched a 2-hit 3-0 shutout in London against the London Tecumsehs, and later he was signed by Guelph. But unfortunately, we in the sporting world in Canada are not, exempt from any racial issues. Bud, being a black player, was not well received by the other Guelph players. In my research, I found a newspaper article that severely criticized the Guelph players for not accepting this great black baseball player. So Bud actually left Guelph, went to Petrolia, played in Petrolia, and I taught high school there 19 years. Little did I know this, but Bud was the victim of something like 13 or 14 errors in a game that he pitched, which kind of shows that they did not support him. And Bud said, I've had enough of this stuff, and went back to the U.S. and played professionally and barnstormed and actually created his own team called the Page Fence Giants. And he traveled around the U.S. with his team in a private railway car and played a lot of baseball, and finally became a member of the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. Next. Here are some of the Canadians who are connected into the early stages of Major League Baseball. Tip O'Neill actually hit .492 in 1887, a long time ago. He was the first Triple Crown winner, batting average, home runs, and RBIs, but it was adjusted to .435 because at that time they counted walks as hits. So, but it's still second in Major League Baseball. Here's another Canadian that I uncovered. Most people don't know anything about Bob Emslie. Emslie won 32 games and only lost 17, which is a lot of games. And he umpired for 33 years. And then on the right-hand side is from this man, George Gibson, is from London, Ontario, played for the Pittsburgh Nationals, actually coached the Pirates to a World Series championship, and I think also managed and coached the Pittsburgh Pirates. Gibson is the man that convinced John Labatt to donate the ground for Labatt Memorial Park. Next. Here's another person that I uncovered, Jack Graney. Jack Graney, who played for the Cleveland Indians and was the first ex-player to do play-by-play. I was doing a presentation in St. Thomas and driving around the town, went on a back street, and there was this portrait of Jack Graney, another probably unknown Canadian. But there's a Jack Graney chapter of the Society of American Baseball Research named after Jack in Cleveland, Ohio. Okay, next page. He actually was the first person to face Babe Ruth. Now, let me tell you about the Intercounty Baseball League. It was founded in 1919 by 4 teams: the Galt Terriers, the Guelph Royals on the right-hand side. On the bottom right is the Stratford Nationals and the Kitchener Panthers. Next one. The Windsor Chiefs were actually members of the Intercounty, and even though they didn't play in the Intercounty for an extended period of time, they won the pennant in 1979, 1980, and 1981. They did not win an Intercounty championship. And my contacts with Intercounty baseball tell me that Windsor was a good franchise. They had good support. They had good players. And what happened is the other teams felt it was just too far to drive. So, when you have teams in Guelph, Galt, Kitchener, Brantford, Hamilton, Toronto, southwestern Ontario, all the way down to the Sun Parlor of Canada in Windsor, is a long drive. And I think that the other team said, hey, we just don't want to go down there. It wasn't because Windsor wasn't very good. The same thing happened to Ottawa. Ottawa joined the league, and the other team said it's too expensive to go up there. Next page. So there's a real good connection with Windsor for sure in the Intercounty. The Intercounty now, the members are a brand new team is Chatham. They're doing real well, the Chatham Barnstormers. Hamilton, London, Kitchener, Guelph, Barrie, Welland, Toronto, and Brantford make up the Intercounty Baseball League right now. Next slide. The Chatham Barnstormers have a really great crest. They've done a great job at what they call Fergie Jenkins Field, of course. I mean, we're proud of Fergie in Chatham and as all Canadians. But they named their team the Barnstormers, and they have a great emblem, and they're packing the stands to watch Intercounty baseball. Next. Labatt Park, I want to tell you a little bit about it. Next slide. London actually joined in 1925, so they're in their 100th year of playing baseball, and this is considered to be the world's oldest baseball grounds. And if you haven't been up to London and you're a baseball fan, you really should take a drive to London. Go to Labatt Park. They have storyboards around the stadium. You pay a little fee to see it. You walk out on the field, and you would be standing and learning about the world's oldest baseball grounds. Next slide. The Major League Baseball historian wrote a letter to the heritage planner for the city of London, and which verifies that Labatt Park, in the last paragraph, is the oldest extant ballpark built to accommodate spectators. And it's just a wonderful thing. London is very proud of it. The Intercounty, of course, is also proud of it. Next slide. And that's, that started in 1877. Now, I don't have a lot of time to go through all of the players. I mean, that's in the book, but I want to show you at least some of the players that played in the intercounty. The top left-hand corner, Ray Upper. Ray Upper was a great ball player, played for years in the intercounty. And the thing that I uncovered by doing research on Ray is he was on third base in a minor league game in Wisconsin when Hank Aaron got his first hit. And the newspaper article said young Hank Aaron got his first hit as a professional player. Well, a minor league player. He played for the Indianapolis Clowns, so he was paid, so he's professional. But past the outstretched arms of Ray Upper. The next picture is Tom Parker, a great Negro League player. Anyways, all these guys are in the book with details about them. The person that I guess it's the biggest picture in the front with the P on his hat is Gabby Anderson. And when Lorene did the poster about my talk, he had a picture of Gabby Anderson. I played with Gabby. He was a professional, terrific ball player, and came back. He's from Detroit, settled in London, played pro, came back and played for the Labatt London Majors team for many, many years. Next slide. A few more pictures of these guys. There's Tommy White from Windsor, Russ Evon. Another player that I can tell you a little bit about, the left-handed batter, Jimmy Wilkes. Jimmy Wilkes was nicknamed Seabiscuit. He was named after the famous racehorse because he was really quick in the outfield. He played for the Newark Eagles and then the Indianapolis Clowns and was signed and played in Brantford, remained in Brantford, but he was a center fielder on a Negro League World Series championship team. Terrific ball player. I played against him for 1 year, and then he umpired for years. Another player on the right-hand side is Pat Seary, a former Major League Baseball player who once hit 4 home runs in one game. He played for the Cubs and the Cleveland Indians. On the bottom left-hand side is the first Canadian black player to sign a professional contract, and that is Manny McIntyre. Manny was from New Brunswick. He was also a terrific hockey player and well respected as a tremendous athlete. The next player who played in Galt with the Dodger uniform is Goody Rosen, a Canadian from Toronto who hit third in the National League 1 year, ran afoul of the manager Leo DeRocher, and spent most of his time in AAA baseball, but was a major league player. The next guy with the Galt Terriers cover picture is Vern Kaiser. Vern never played pro, but everybody that I've ever talked to or read stories about him said that he was one of the best players in the intercounty, but he was a Montreal Canadian prospect, actually played for the Montreal Canadiens, and hockey was his love. And then on the right-hand side is the great Cunningham, Larry Cunningham, who played for Galt and Guelph. A terrific ball player. He actually played for Hamilton. I did have the opportunity. He was the last Negro League player that I know of who came in to play in the intercounty. Okay, next slide. So let me tell you about some of the great black players that played in the intercounty. I believe that Harry Coursey from London was the first black player in the intercounty. He played in 1926 for the London Majors, and he was a pitcher, and he was good. And he was also very fast. He's actually, that picture is in his track uniform. He was a great sprinter, and he actually ran faster than 2 of the sprinters that the Canadian Olympic track and field team picked to go into the Olympics. And I talked to Barry Howson, a friend of mine who is a former great basketball player. Actually, Barry's the first black player from Canada to be on an Olympic team. And Barry knew a lot about Harry Coursey, and he said that Harry was not selected. Barry thinks because he was black. So there was, some discrimination, we know that at that time. And the reason why they didn't take Harry, they said he needed to practice his form. So Harry did not go to the Olympics, but he was one of the top sprinters in Canada, unfortunately. Next slide. I want to mention very quickly the 1934 Chatham colored all-star teams. I covered some of the games that they played in my book. I put a red circle around Earl Flat Chase. The reason I did that, not that I would overlook, the other players, but Flat Chase was one of the players from that all-star team who played for the London Majors. And if you want to read, listen, folks, I want you to buy my book, but if you want to read more about the Chatham Colored All-Stars, there are two terrific books, actually both by Windsor ladies. The 1934 Chatham Colored All-Stars Barrier Breaking Year by Heidi Jacobs, and then Miriam Wright's book called Sporting Justice, which will give you a lot more information about the things that these players faced and, of course, their accomplishments. Those are really good books. Next slide. So let's talk about baseball and how it expanded. We all know that Jackie Robinson broke the colored barrier, the black, kind of you guys can't play in this league situation. And I credit the 1946 tour of Bob Feller and Satchel Paige as one of the things that really helped Jackie Robinson and other players finally get into the major leagues. You see, Feller was quite an entrepreneur, and he was in the Navy, and during the war he was on a ship figuring out how he could make more money. He decided to do a barnstorming tour. So what he did was he picked what he thought were the best white players out of Major League Baseball. And then he approached Satchel Paige. He says, you pick the best black players and we'll travel around and play exhibition games. And they rented two airplanes. One was obviously Bob Feller's All-Stars, and the other one was Satchel Paige All-Stars. And they traveled around, and the black players, I believe, I know they held their own, but they may have actually won more games than the white, quote, white Major League All-Stars. But that was a breakthrough. Feller, Dizzy Dean, and other players said, hey, these guys should play in Major League Baseball. We got to get them in there. The thing that I enjoyed researching on and finding out is that four players who toured with either Feller or Page, Jeep Jessup, Barney Brown, and Max Banning were black players who played for Satchel Paige. And then Phil Marshall-Doan, who was from up around the Midland, Pettawasheen area, he played for Bob Feller's team. Those guys later also played in the intercounty. Okay, next slide. So there were a lot of players. Robinson signed in 1945. He was down in Daytona in 46 and played in Montreal for a championship team in 1947. And then, of course, cracked the Brooklyn Dodgers lineup. Another pitcher who did not make it to major leagues was Johnny Wright. And Johnny Wright played with Robinson in Montreal, and then he played in the Can-Am. Well, they might have called it the Provincial League at the time, which was basically in Quebec. Later in I believe 1949, Larry Doby played for the Cleveland Indians, and Larry Doby and another player who played the Major League Baseball, Monty Irvin, were on the Newark Eagles team that I told you that Jimmy Wilkes, the guy that was named Seabiscuit, was on the team with them. And the thing that's strange, or kind of shows you how good Jimmy Wilkes was, is both Larry Doby and Monty Irvin, when they played Major League Baseball, played in the outfield. But when they played with Jimmy Wilkes on the Newark Eagles, they were in the infield. That just shows you how good Jimmy Wilkes was. He covered so much territory. They didn't need Doby and Irvin out in the outfield. Next slide. So if you're ever in Daytona, real quick, what a beautiful ballpark sitting near the Intercoastal, and it is called Jackie Robinson Ballpark. Next slide. There's pictures about Jackie Robinson, storyboards, really interesting if you're ever down that way. Now, let's take a quick look at what I call the glory years. The glory years of the Intercounty, I consider between 1948 and 1958, maybe before, maybe a little bit after. Why? Because there were 45 Negro League players who played in that period of time. Not all at once, but a lot of great Negro League players, and the caliber of baseball was phenomenal. They packed the stands. There were sellout crowds in almost every park. And there were also 45 minor pros, and there were 20 former Major League players that played in the Intercounty. Some of them had played and came back at the end of their career, and some of them had not yet become major league players. I think it was probably one of the best period of times. Next slide. Uh, in You see what happened in the intercounty is London between 1943 and 1948 was very dominant. They won 5 intercounty championships, mostly because of Tommy White and I have to say a lot of the Windsor guys, which is a 83.3% success rate. So London was the top of the cream of the crop. I mean, they were hard to beat. Next slide. So what happens is a guy in Galt by the name of Gus Murray, and I'll show you his picture in a minute, started recruiting players and paying them money. You see, in 1948, the year before he got this Gus Murray from Galt, started getting really good players. London had won the Intercounty Championship. They won the Canadian Championship. And then the winners of the United States National Amateur, it was really semi-pro championship, the Fort Wayne General Electrics, and London played a series. Next slide. And London won it. And they won it in the 7th game. And on that team were 3 of my coaches, Jack Ferris and Joe Bayshard, who was a batting championship winner in 1949. Next slide. Also on that team, to show you how good London was Tom Burgess. Tom Burgess later played in the major leagues. He played for the St. Louis Cardinals, and he played for the California Angels and was a major league coach for the New York Mets and I believe the Atlanta Braves. And as I told you, Russ Evon was a 2-time runner-up and a 2-time batting champion. So they were a powerful team. Next slide. And the star of the team probably was Tommy White. Russ Evon was asked once, how good was London? He said London was Tommy White. Now, this is a Windsor guy. He was 25-1 in 1948. His teams won 9 intercounty championships, 4 provincial championships, 4 Canadian championships, won the Canadian American Challenge Championship, and was voted as Canada's most outstanding baseball player in 1948 and won the Babe Ruth Award. Next slide. He was a great player. So here's the 1949 Galt Terriers. They were the pioneers in bringing in Negro League players. Next slide. Gus Murray on the left-hand side was kind of like Bill Veeck. If you look at the right-hand corner of the slide, Bill Veeck was the most innovative baseball owner. He owned the St. Louis Browns and later the Cleveland Indians and then later the Chicago White Sox. And Bill Veeck did all kinds of things to promote his team. He's the one that got fireworks when a player hit a home run in Chicago. He said sometimes my team isn't very good, but it still should be fun. Well, Gus Murray was Canada's Bill Veeck. He was connected to George Selkirk, the former New York Yankee who replaced Babe Ruth. Selkirk, the Canadian, was a 2-time All-Star and won 5 World Series championships. So he was connected, Gus Murray and George Selkirk. So Selkirk got former players to play for Galt. Now, one of Bill Veeck's famous promotions was putting a very tiny guy by the name of Eddie Goodell up to plate in 1951. And the place was packed. He only signed him for 1 day, but Eddie Goodell was the smallest player to have played in a major league game. Next slide. So Gus Murray goes to work. He pulls in Tommy Padden as the manager. Now, Tommy Padden played for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the New York Yankees. Babe Ruth is at bat in this slide, and the catcher is Tommy Padden. And in 1949, Gus Murray brings in the first Negro League player from Buffalo by the name of Jeff Shelton. And Jeff was a great pitcher. Next slide. Murray also brings in 2 former Brooklyn Dodgers. I alluded to Goody Rosen. Goody was a center fielder, great baseball player. And he brings in a former major league player who pitched for the Brooklyn Dodgers by the name of Tommy Warren. A nice, interesting thing about Tommy Warren is in my book. I'm not going to tell you, but it is quite a story about Tommy Warren for sure. Next slide. He also signs a former Boston Braves Major League player, Connie Creedon. And I also mentioned to you that Vern Kaiser was as good as any of them who played for the Montreal Canadiens. Next slide. So Galt Terriers had a really strong team. There's Manny McIntyre, and he signed. He's in the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, and he's also in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. And in 1951, London finally signed a black Negro League player by the name of Ted Alexander. And Alexander was a great pitcher, and he is credited as encouraging Jackie Robinson to play pro baseball and ask him to write a letter to a Negro League team who signed him. Next slide. So Canadians, of course, played in the intercounty. Here's the first Canadian Major League Baseball All-Star. His name is Oscar Judd, and he played in Guelph. He played with the Cubs. He played with Boston and Philadelphia. And actually, in his last year of professional, not Major League, but the AAA Toronto Maple Leafs, he threw a no-hitter. The thing that I enjoyed finding out in a newspaper article is Oscar Judd and Ted Alexander, the guy that I just mentioned, played for London, pitched against each other in a game. And Alexander knocked down Judd, hit him in the back. And the next time that Alexander came out to bat, Judd knocked him down. So they gave no quarters, these guys. And it was really funny because the box score said, hit by pitch, Judd by Alexander, Alexander by Judd. It was a different time of baseball. Next slide. They played tough. You didn't dig in. Here's another interesting player. Sadi Grote was a full-blood native person who was born at the Grand River Reservation in Brantford, Ontario. He moved to Buffalo, and he was a great football player in high school. He played professional lacrosse, and then he was really good in baseball. He played in St. Thomas and Galt, but he was a roommate of Gil Hodges. Gil Hodges is a major league manager and former player for the Dodgers and the New York Giants, and they were such good friends that Sadi named his first son Gil. He was also a roommate, or not a roommate, but a teammate with Chuck Connors. Now, most of you, if you're a little bit older, you would know. Younger people probably wouldn't know, but Chuck Connors was on a television program called The Rifleman. It was a long-running black and white story that Chuck Connors was a sheriff, and it was just a Western story. But Connors was a great baseball player. But Sadi was quite successful. He owned a couple of restaurants in Newport News, Virginia. He coached, and he did play 3 games with Jackie Robinson, and he was a World War II veteran. Next slide. Other Negro League veterans that we just don't have time to go into. Bottom, Leonard Pigg was a great player. There's Barney Brown. Barney Brown pitched in North Dakota, and the team that opposed them was Bismarck, and the Bismarck owner couldn't get anybody to beat Barney Brown, so he finally contacted Abe Saperstein. Abe Saperstein, probably some of you would know, owned the Harlem Globetrotters, but he also basketball team, but he also owned a touring barnstorming team called the Harlem Globetrotters. And Barney Brown was doing so well that the owner of the Bismarck team said to Saperstein, "Get me somebody that can beat Barney Brown. I'm tired of losing." So he got Satchel Paige. So Satchel Paige and Barney Brown pitched against each other, and there were so many people wanting to see the games. They actually put extra passenger cars on trains to commute back and forth to the ballparks to see these games. Bob Griffith played for St. Thomas. Max Manning was a great pitcher. He played for Brantford. Sherwood Brewer played, and up in the corner is Stanley Doc Glenn, who played for St. Thomas, and he and another guy that I played with, Johnny Ambrose, they won 2 intercounty championships as pitcher-catcher. Next slide. I really want to tell you about Wilmer Fields' Shanny and allude to Freddie. It's a special chapter in my book. Next slide. Wilmer Fields had to be the greatest player that ever played in the intercounty. This man should be in the Hall of Fame, not because of his success in the intercounty, but because of his success as the most valuable player in virtually every team he ever played on. Wilmer played in the Negro Leagues for the Homestead Grays. He played in the what they call the tropics, or the Central American Winter Leagues. He played in Puerto Rico. He played in Mexico. He played in Venezuela. He was always one of the top players. Just really quickly, look at that slide carefully. He played 4 years in the intercounty. He won the batting championship twice. He was second by 2 points. That's the year that Freddie Thomas beat him. Excuse me, he played 3 years in the intercounty and 1 year out in what they call the Manitoba Dakota League, where he hit 379. But he, out of the 3 years in the intercounty, won the batting championship twice and lost to Freddie Thomas by 2 points. He was a terrific ball player, a big man, hit, throw, and run, pitch, do anything. Next slide. Then there's the great Shanny Clifford. Shanny Clifford played the Homestead Grays, played for Brantford, was a lifelong resident of Brantford, and it's a really funny story. If you know Frank Cosentino, Frank Cosentino was a football player, a quarterback, played in several Grey Cup games, a professor, a coach, written several books, actually many books. And he was, Frank was considered to be a prospect as a pitcher. And the Boston Brave scout, Dewey Griggs, invited him to Galt. And he said, I'll get Shanny, a catcher. Let's see what you got, kid. So Cosentino goes there and starts throwing pitches. And Shanny says, come on, kid, throw hard. Let me see what you got. So he throws really hard. Well, Cosentino was the starting pitcher that night, and he was so tired from warming up and showing the scout and Shanny what he had that he got knocked out in about the second inning. And then he realized that Cosentino and Clifford had kind of duped him into throwing real hard. But great stories about the great Shanny Clifford, hit long home runs that people that say they're still looking for. Next slide. Then, of course, is the great Freddie Thomas. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Freddie. I mean, he's just a wonderful player. You know, I went to Assumption University, and I heard from Hank Biasetti and some of the older players and some of the priests there that Freddie Thomas was just, you couldn't describe how good Freddie Thomas, let's just put it that way. You could not describe how good Freddie Thomas was. As an athlete, he played football, he played basketball, he played baseball, he was a track and field star. Everything he did, he excelled at. And finally, I think probably because of the work of Windsor and people, like the Amherstburg Freedom Museum, who knew about Freddie Thomas, have finally got him some recognition. But if Wilmer Fields was the best, Freddie Thomas is in the same breath. Okay, next slide. So 1952-53, real quickly, Kitchener won 2, and Guelph, next slide, started catching up when they brought in this Pat Seary. And there's the baseball where he hit 4 home runs when he played for the Chicago White Sox. Okay, next slide. He hit some really long home runs too. There's Phil Marshall Doan. He was a World War II veteran, got shot down and was captured, but came back and continued his career with the Philadelphia Athletics. A real great Canadian. Next slide. Moving ahead, I want to tell you real quickly. I want to tell you stories about people you can read about. But Bobby Deacon was a really great ball player that came out of London. He was the most valuable player as a youngster and signed eventually with the New York Yankees. And unfortunately, Bobby had his back broken when a runner between first and second tried to jump over him as Bobby was fielding a ball and turned to throw to the shortstop. Bobby was second baseman and landed and broke his back. He recovered, but then he dislocated and broke a thumb, and he couldn't hold a bat. And the Yankees thought so much of him, they would not release him for 14 years. Why? Because they thought maybe he would make a comeback and sign with somebody else. Next slide. So, local guys were great ball players. Here's another interesting player, one-armed ball player, Pete Gray. He was an American, had a childhood accident, evidently was on a cart selling potatoes and tomatoes and jumped off and unfortunately got his arm caught in a wheel and, it had to be amputated. But the guy didn't give up, and he actually played for the St. Louis Browns. He came up and played in the provincial league, did real well. Actually, was the most valuable player when he went back in the States, and that's why the St. Louis Browns picked him up. He played in Guelph, and there's lots of stories that some of the former players, actually quite elderly guys that are still alive, that I talked to about Pete Gray, that made my book, I think, a little bit more interesting. Next slide. So there's another great player. This actually, when I told you about some of the older guys, Walt Jeffries is 95 years old. I played against Walt in the 60s, and Walt told me that Udi Napier, who played for the Pittsburgh Crawfords, was warming him up one night in the bullpen, and he says, "I don't need a glove. You don't throw hard enough to get anybody out," which I thought was kind of funny. Anyway, so there's Everett Ziggy Marcel. He played in Guelph. He was a great ball player. He was actually a great basketball player. And he played for the Harlem Globetrotters when they were serious and playing and not fooling around. And there's the great Leonard Pounding Pig, who led a Negro League in batting one year. Next slide. So there's a lot of great players. There's Jimmy Wilkes. There's another great ball player, Bobby Thurman. Bob played for Brantford for a while, and he later played in the major leagues with Cincinnati. Okay, next slide. Another player that you all probably would have heard of is Hank Aaron. What I uncovered was Hank Aaron nearly signed with the Brantford Red Sox. Larry Pennell was the owner. He was actually a Solicitor General for Canada. He was in the Pearson government as a cabinet minister, and he owned, with the mayor of Brantford, part share of the Brantford Red Sox. He heard about Hank Aaron, and he went over to Buffalo and tried to recruit him. But Hank said he was going to sign with the Boston Braves, and the Braves scout Dewey Griggs said to the Braves, he actually telegrammed. He says, "We need to sign this kid. He's really good, and we don't want to lose out because Willie Mays. We lost Willie Mays, and Willie went to the Giants. We don't want Aaron to go to the Giants." And later in years gone by, Hank Aaron said, if the Giants had given me $50 more a month, Willie Mays and I would have been in the same outfield. Of course, Hank has passed away, and just recently, the great Willie Mays passed away. Terrific ball player. I saw him play in Philadelphia, and he was sensational. Next slide. So Hank almost did there. Here's a couple of Negro League players that I cover in the book. Chief Jessup, perennial all-star in the Negro Leagues, and Ed Steele. Ed Steele played for Galt, and he used to hit the ball out of the park, and he used to hit a roof on this side of the Grand River, the ballpark side of the Grand River, and they called it Steele's roof because he hit it so often with the home runs. He led the league that year in home runs. So again, two other great Negro League players. Okay, moving along real quickly. I want to kind of skip ahead here, next slide, and tell you real quickly about another great ball player. So just next slide. The blonde Hollywood hurler was Harry Fisher, and Harry played for Pittsburgh. He played for New Orleans. When he played for the Pirates, they didn't know what to do with him. He was a great hitter, and he was a great pitcher. He was a bit wild, but the Pirates didn't know what to do with him. He spent more time in the AAA, but then came and played in the Intercounty. And he, Freddie Thomas, and Wilmer Fields were neck and neck in home runs just about all the time. Next slide. Harry played for the Hollywood Stars. And the Hollywood Stars, before Major League Baseball went out to the West Coast, was the only game in town. They were a AAA ball club. And the Hollywood Stars actually had shares in the ownership of that ballpark. Names like Bob Hope, Groucho Marx, Bing Crosby, Gene Autry, Elizabeth Taylor, Bill Holden, Humphrey Bogart, etc., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin. And the chairman was Cecil B. DeMille, the great Hollywood director. I got a kick out of this picture. There's Elizabeth Taylor to the left. I think she's like 16 or 17 years old. And baseball players are told to watch the third base coach to see whether they should be waved in and whether they can get it at home plate before the throw from the outfield. This ball player turning around third base is certainly getting a good look at Jane Mansfield. Next slide. So there's Max and Barney. Next slide. There is Frank Coleman, who played for the New York Yankees and Pittsburgh Pirates, and he was just inducted. Well, he's in the London Hall of Fame, but he's also inducted in the London Majors Hall of Fame this year. Next slide. There's Johnny Ambrose and the great Doc Glenn. They came from the Provincial League and the Boston Braves organization, came to Brantford and won 2 intercounty championships. And I played with Johnny in London, a gentleman and a great ball player. Lots of stories I wrote about Doc and Johnny. Next slide. So that's the last player that I know of who played in the Negro Leagues and then later played in the intercounty was Larry Cunningham. Next slide. So let me tell you, we'll wrap up here some taters. Next slide. A tater is a baseball expression for a long home run. They called it, Ted Williams called it a blue dart, a salami, going yard, a bomb, whatever you want to call it. We like to call them taters. Well, Earl Flat Chase from Chatham, next slide, hit a tater in Chatham out of what is now called Fergie Jenkins Field at Rotary Park. And the ball went over the right field fence. And if you follow the line, and next on the other side of the ballpark is a football field. And Canadians know that the Canadian field is longer and wider than the American field. It's 65 yards wide. So if you multiply 65 times 3, 3 5s are 15, 195 yards, and then add on another 270, Flat hit the ball over the football field, and there was a track that ran around the field. So there's another 36 inches for 6 lanes on both sides. There's 72. There's another 6 feet. The ball hit the asphalt next to where the old Kinsman Auditorium was, and it rolled and rolled into the Chatham Memorial Arena. And I had a friend that took a golf measuring device with another guy and measure that, and it's a long way. Is it possible that a guy can hit a ball that far? Yeah, because Bob Thurman, that player that I told you played for Cincinnati, hit one in Buffalo over the center field scoreboard, and it landed on the top of a house. And people verified that, and the lady said it felt like an atomic bomb. Now, if it had hit the asphalt, my gosh, who's to know how long it went? The next slide. Another great home run was hit by Wilmer Fields. He hit one in the intercounty that was record distance. But in 1958, when he played for the Mexico City Reds, Wilmer was a right-handed batter. That's the old stadium. I put a star right near center field, right in front of the scoreboard. Wilmer hit the ball over the center field fence. It cleared that little sign that says Fuji, which is a film, and landed on the road. And Wilmer, in his biography, said, I really got a hold. I wish you could have seen that one, because Willie Mays and Hank Aaron and all those great sluggers played there, and no one ever hit one that far. So Wilmer was quite a guy. Next slide. And well respected. There's another former player, a Negro League player. No, actually, he did play Negro League, but he played semi-pro ball. His name was Thumper Jackson, and he hit one over the left field fence, over the trees, over the barrier, over the walkway, into the middle of the Thames River. So next slide. So that's last thing I want to tell you is another Windsor connection. Next slide. I got a hold of Ron Hodera. Ron Hodera played for the Brantford Red Sox. He was from Windsor. He played with Willie Casanova. And he pitched. He was a shortstop, and they played a game in the Ontario Championship in Brantford. And Ronnie Hodera hit a home run off of a guy that was soon to sign in pro. So Brantford wanted him to come. So he played. He was young. He was at Assumption High School. Later, after baseball, he became Father Ronnie Hodera. Next slide. So Father Hodera was still alive, and I talked to him, and he gave me stories, and I decided to add another chapter of stories that he told me about his playing days, about the Negro League players, and I added stories from other older players that I knew. I was able to talk to Jack Ferris. He played in the 40s. I was able to talk to Tubby Jones. I was able to talk to lots of former players, and they gave me stories. And I respect them. And when I do an in-person thing and I wrap up, I put this slide on and I ask people, because sometimes, there's a liquor license, they're having a few drinks, and I say, please stand up. Let's remember all those great players that you've heard about, maybe you saw on television. Mickey Mantle is gone. Babe Ruth is gone. Joe DiMaggio, Willie, Hank, a lot of great players have gone. Let's think about them, our parents, We've lost mothers and fathers, some of us brothers and sisters. Let's think about them for the memories that they had. Next slide. And then what we do, and I can't do it for you folks, is we stand up and I ask people, I say, stand up, let's stretch our legs, we're done. And I would like to ask you, what is the song that is sung more often than any other song in the United States of America? And people, because it's a baseball presentation, say, oh, it must be Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I said, no, it isn't. It's Happy Birthday. But while you're standing, let's sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And I tell you, people sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and we wrap up the evening with some questions. So I'm finished. I did my best. I did as fast as I could. I think it's a good book. I've never had anybody say I didn't like it. And you can get it on Amazon. I don't know whether the museum is going to stock some. I can, talk to Lorene about that later. But it's easy to get, and I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening. And I turn it back to Lorene. If you have any questions, be glad to answer them.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul, for not only sharing your experience, but your extensive knowledge and your passion for the sport. We just had a comment from Dawn saying that it was a fascinating presentation, fascinating history, so many stories. Thank you. And others are saying thank you in the chat as well. You answered one of my questions. I mean, I'm going to be sharing a post on our Facebook page with a link to purchase your book following this presentation. And again, this presentation is going to be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube page and our Facebook page. So that people can learn more. I did want to add as well, too, you'd mentioned Fred Thomas, and he is absolutely a hero here in Windsor, Essex. And last year, we, at our Emancipation celebration, we have the Legacy Hero Award, and it's given posthumously to a community pillar who has passed on, and their family members come and represent them. And last year, we gave Fred Thomas posthumously our Legacy Hero Award. And so his family came and accepted that award. But I also wanted to mention, if you come to Windsor, absolutely you need to check out, there's Black History murals that have been created and put up in the McDougall Street corridor in Windsor. And one of them is Fred Thomas, thanks to the efforts of the Essex County Black Historical Research Society, who was in charge of getting those murals put up. But yeah, I definitely recommend it's right near Erie Street. It's where Windsor Eats is. It's in the alleyway there. So it's a beautiful mural. So I definitely recommend people take a look. And again, we're getting lots of comments of thank you in here. Yeah, I guess if there's no questions, I do have one person typing. Oh, let me see. We do have a question. Do you enjoy watching current MLB, and does it compare to historical games? That's a great question.
Oh, it sure is. I watch baseball, let's say occasionally. I think when you play the game, you enjoy playing it. Sometimes watching it, it might be a little slow. It's a game that leads into momentum. Like, things happen very fast, and I think that Major League Baseball has done a great job changing some of the rules. You don't have to throw 4 pitches to intentionally walk somebody. They put some time limits on how long a pitcher can take and how long a batter, has to be in the batter's box. He can't go getting out and stuff like that. So I think they've tried to speed it up. I can tell you one thing. Yeah, I enjoy it. I watch the World Series. I can tell you that baseball over the years, and I'm talking, let's talk the 50s, this period of time that I wrote about mostly, the games were played a lot faster. They played 9 innings in 2 hours and 31 to 2 hours and 41 minutes. And then the graph shows that the time of a game, the average time of a game had increased. And I think that's why Major League Baseball did everything they can to make it, faster. This is the age where people have got media, they've got devices. Maybe their attention span isn't what it used to be. They can, check the game, the whole game in 30 minutes. When you see a summary of games, they can see highlights. So unless you're prepared to go to the ballpark, get a hot dog, walk around, relax, chat, and visit, I can see why a lot of people, maybe don't watch it. I think it's better at the ballpark, but yeah, I watch it, and it's still an amazing game for sure.
We also have another comment just saying thanks for the stories, and they Googled and looked up baseball reference pages on several of the people that you mentioned.
Mhm.
And also, Don commented as well, interesting, that is true. Thank you, and I agree. The experience of the game is the best feeling. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for giving this presentation today. I particularly enjoyed the fact that you narrowed the focus on the history to talk about individual players, because sometimes we look at the bigger picture and we don't look at the individuals who made up that bigger picture. So I do really appreciate you sharing your extensive knowledge on all of these amazing players who contributed so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And my father used to say, I hope I didn't raise somebody that's not aware what he's saying. And I will tell you that, when I speak in London, obviously I spend a little bit more time on the London players. When I'm in Brantford, we spend a little bit more time on some of the great, Brantford players. And Windsor, it was easy for me to deal with the Windsor players who played the intercounty because I knew a lot of them. I'm 82, but I went to school at Assumption, and Hank Biasetti was the basketball coach, so I knew him. I was coached by Willie and Bruno. I knew Jack Ferris. He was a professor, not only my coach, but it was a professor when I took my teacher's qualification. So I knew those guys, and I had met Tommy White also. Russ Evon was my manager, So my gosh, I roomed with the great Hank Zerwiniak from Windsor later in the '60s, and Hank was a batting champion. He was from Windsor, and I roomed with Hank, and I have a lot of respect for Hank. He's passed away now, but he was a great ball player. Signed with the Boston Red Sox and played pro ball. So, gosh, I was sorry to hear that Johnny Upham had passed away. Johnny Upham was a great ball player, played Major League Baseball. He didn't play in the intercounty, but what a great ball. Eddie Patrician from Assumption High School also played in the Baltimore Orioles organization. Junior Stolarchuk. I mean, it goes on and on how good the Windsor players were, and I was fortunate to know a lot of them, and was proud to write about the Windsor connection in the Intercounty Baseball League.
Amazing. Again, thank you so much for being here today. I learned so much, and I'm hoping that our audience did as well. I do believe they did. So thank you so much again for giving this presentation, and thank you to everyone in the audience for being here today. We truly appreciate your attendance of this presentation, and thank you again, Paul, so much for sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for having me.